When we're trying to improve our art, when we're trying to get really good at this drawing thing, there's nothing worse than being stuck in tutorial hell. This is where we look everywhere for skills, tutorials, processes, tips, techniques, hacks, whatever we can find, brushes, programs, anything new, but yet we fail to look at the most important thing, which is inside ourselves, at us actually putting in the work and making art. The problem here is that drawing is a physical based skill. It's not about what we know, it's a matter of what we have integrated. You need to actually just practice this. It's really basic. And so many artists that I know have just gotten really good by doing it, by just practicing, by putting one foot in front of the other. And it's often just a fundamental part of this whole process that we skip. And I found throughout my journey and through a lot of the people that I've taught that you can actually learn most things that are really important about drawing by just doing it. That ideally, in fact, what you do is learn everything you need to know about art by just making awesome, fun art all the time. Now, you may be saying, what about the foundation? What about our craft? And yes, learning to draw really well, I think, is one of the things that personally I put a lot of effort into on this channel. And it's also the thing that really allowed my own career to go to a whole new level. So craft is important, but more importantly, what I want to talk about in this video and share with you is how there are actually two foundational layers of things you need to learn beneath that foundation. Beneath the concepts of drawing, perspective, rendering, anatomy that we do need to understand as artists, there's two hidden levels of foundation that if you don't have, you won't succeed. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about line and color illustration, the same style that I create all my comics and illustrations in, you can check out my free quick start guide. It's aimed to get you up and running quickly in Photoshop, developing your own simple, reliable line and color process. It's free. The link will be in the description. Go check it out. So one of the biggest challenges I find that I faced early on, and I see pretty much everyone run into, is not knowing what really to focus on along your artistic journey. And this is often manifests with us, and this happened to me, thinking about style, all these surface level things. I was so concerned about what my style was and what the surface of my art looked like that I never really doubled down on the foundation of how to improve my craft, how to get better at anatomy, perspective, rendering. I kind of put that stuff off. But also I think we're often really obsessed with the idea of how we're going to make money with our art if you want to do it as a career, how we're going to do all this kind of fancy stuff. And it's so often that focusing on those things means that your brain is kind of full of all that, when really what we should be doing in the beginning is dealing with these foundational concepts, both of craft and a couple of other elements that I think are really, really important. So when I began kind of making courses and online courses and curriculum for people kind of mapping their journey, and I spent 10 years designing kind of university level curriculum for boot camp drawing. So I spent a lot of time thinking about this. But when I started doing it online, I really thought that we need a good progression system here to understand, okay, depending on where you are, what do you actually need to focus on? And I found that this idea of just figuring out where you are on your journey and what you should focus on just unlocks a lot of people. It can really make the difference between you kind of just spinning your wheels and, again, being in tutorial hell, just kind of looking at all this different stuff, and being able to alternatively really sort of dig down and focus on one or two things that are actually going to make the difference and move you forward. So there's 5 stages here that I've kind of designed as a good way to view our artistic journey. And yeah, let me show them to you now. So these are the 5 stages of the illustration journey, of the journey that we go on as artists. And this slide is actually from the Line and Color Academy, which is a course I built to. It's really built around these kind of 5 stages, and I found this to be really sort of helpful. But I just want to share with you the basic idea because I think you can get a lot out of just understanding these deeper foundational levels that you need to work on and kind of how a lot of this stuff works together. So the way I like to think of this is that often what we kind of want to be doing is dealing with stage 3. And this is where I think you know how to make art. You are able to kind of make pieces and also work on your foundational concepts at the same time. So what this means is that once you kind of get into the habit of making art, and once you're making a lot of different pictures and you're doing this regularly and you kind of have a reliable way of doing things, it's pretty easy to improve. You tend to find that the snowball here rolls downhill because you can just make art and you slowly get better. And as long as you have a really solid process where you can learn anatomy while you make art, like you have preparatory stages where you're able to explore, you have a concept phase where you think about thumbnails, and you have a phase where you're able to explore and play with color schemes. Like if you really build a solid process, then once you get to that stage, you kind of are making art and you're improving at the same time. And I feel like this is often what a lot of us want to be doing. And I think this is the reality that is certainly possible, is that once you kind of figure this out, it really is just a matter of measuring like how fast you're going as you make different pieces and you kind of think of things that you want to create and you sort of go through that process. It's just a constant iteration. The challenge is, though, that a lot of us can't get there because we're missing these first two stages that I think are really important. And this is what I alluded to when we think of hidden foundations and foundations that are below the concept of craft and rendering and perspective, etc. So I find that you often can't really get to the point where you're making that type of art where just every week you kind of just make some art and you get a little bit better, and then you think, hey, I should do this, I should do that. Maybe I'll take a class on composition, or maybe I'll try and improve on a little bit. But because you're kind of just adding to your skill base, it's just a matter of things getting better and better by their own. The problem is that often, as I mentioned, we don't have a reliable process. So we don't have an easy way to kind of step through those phases. And I find the number one challenge that people have is they're not building enough reliability into the step-by-step. So we often sort of get lost, or we never really figure out how to finish any piece. So you just kind of end up unfinishing 100 pieces. And you kind of like never really completing the image. The other thing is that if you do have a phase of your process, even if it's just, and I've spoken about this on the channel before, even if it's just 5% of your time, so say you're only going to spend a couple of hours on an image, but let's spend 5% of that planning it, thinking about what the thumbnail is, the composition, and building that muscle of kind of thinking about it. This is where you're just naturally going to be able to explore the concepts of composition, of picture making theory, of illustration theory, just automatically as you explore and build different ideas for illustrations. Also, you could add a color rough stage there where you're able to explore different color options and learn color theory. If you're looking to learn drawing, one of the best ways to learn drawing and relate it to your actual art is to make sure that you had a construction phase. And this just means that you add a phase in your art where you can really erase, you can hack away at it, you can construct, you can build form, and that you just make sure that this is a part of your process. And this is where you can crack open the anatomy book as you're working on this and just see like how does the deltoid and the pectoral and the bicep connect, right? Like how do those things work? And as you're working on your illustration, you can apply the things that you're learning day to day on it, right? And I think this is what we often talk about when it comes to sort of learning on the job. And I think just developing that reliable process is something that we should aspire to and really sort of focus on. So that's often the stage that I focus on before we get to like, hey, let's just make art and get better. Is how are we making art? Let's get a reliable process that really works for us. And this could be whatever it is. Like, again, I often teach comic book style stuff. That's the kind of style I work in, but I spend a lot of time teaching people how to paint. I've done a lot of sort of professional painted styles, and it's the same, right? Like everyone has a process for how you get from A to B, and making sure yours is reliable and it has scope for you to improve and explore and experiment means that you can very easily just get better by doing it. The problem is, and this is why there's a stage beneath that, is that most of us actually have trouble turning up and actually making art. So stage one is the foundational layer beneath that. So if we think about developing our craft, getting better, like getting really good at art as being that stage 3. You can just get better by doing. In order to get to that, you need to build a foundation of having a reliable process underneath that. That's what facilitates you just getting better by making art. But beneath that, you need a foundation at the very bottom of turning up and doing it, of developing a consistent artistic practice. And this is why this has really nothing to do with any of the stuff that I teach. But I think it's so important that I basically built an entire stage around it within the Line and Color Academy. And I think it's something that you definitely should focus on. If you're kind of struggling to turn up and you're, again, stuck in tutorial hell, you're kind of not quite sure how to put all these things together, often one of the challenges in the beginning is we're just not making enough art. We don't have a good artistic habit. We often have maybe some toxic relationships to art. You can easily be struggling. A lot of the things that people often talk about when we sort of go through this material are that people can't find the time, and a lot of this is negotiating with people in your life, finding a nice space to make art, making sure you find the right time to make art, really fitting it into your life, and making sure that everything around that is kind of working. Because one of the biggest challenges we have early on is that you just kind of sit down to do art, and we just get that sort of blank page syndrome. You get artistic block, and a lot of that is because we haven't really worked up to it. You haven't really thought about how to get in a good creative state. So there's a lot of stuff we can do there, right? And there's a lot of things you can do to work on that. But the number one tip I'd give you for figuring this out is just to focus on turning up. So when you're trying to build a good habit, it's less a matter of you making some amazing piece of art. And what I often recommend is just start with a sketchbook. Just grab pencil and paper and try and make sure that you are regularly turning up to draw. Don't worry too much about what you're drawing or how good it is. Again, that will come later as we build those other foundational layers. But in the beginning, what you want to do is just focus on, am I turning up? Am I building a good relationship with art? Am I finding a good way for me to get into a creative flow? And you can just do that with pencil and paper. And it's mostly about building the space within your life for doing this and the regular habit than it is immediately expecting amazing things to happen. Again, once you build that foundation, that's where you can start to create a lot more regular art. What I actually recommend is that until you are actually past that point of being at what I like to call stage 3, where you are just able to make art and see some progress and track it, don't worry about style or any of these fancier things in terms of making really complicated images or worrying too much about are these images like really good, or how are you going to work professionally, how are you going to make money for this, like what are professionals doing, what tools they're using. Is until you kind of really have the basics sorted and you're making art regularly, you are able to improve, and you can kind of see like over a couple of months of time that you're making art regularly and it's getting better because you've built that foundation of turning up and having just a really simple way of making art. Don't worry about style. Don't worry about professional stuff. Don't worry about any of that other thing. It's not going to make any difference until you can just make really basic images and see that you're making progress. And I'll give you a couple of tips about finding a simple, reliable process. Because again, this is something I found is so useful with my own art. Like, this is how I'm often able to get way more art done, is just through like even this image you see before me. It's just a really basic process that I've kind of developed. And what I found is I can just step through that. I can do it in my sleep. But the key that I really found in terms of developing a simple way of making art is focus on the illustration process and make that as nuanced as you want. So think about having a good step-by-step process. And this could vary drastically depending on what kind of style you want, right? Whether you're doing a painted style, like a lot of people start with a very amorphous, soupy, vague idea of what they want to paint, and they kind of refine it over time. The line and color process is completely different. We kind of start with a clear picture of the drawing we're going to do, and we often add that atmosphere and soupiness and the feeling at the end, right? So everyone's going to have a completely different process, and yours will be very unique. Even if you draw comics exactly like me, I'm sure your process would be very different. But we all often have similar building blocks, and it's really a matter of thinking about having a really solid way to plan, thinking about thumbnails and color roughs and sort of building a great idea, being able to experiment and learn composition, illustration, and picture making theory as you go. And also then making sure you add this construction phase. So often the thing that we're looking for is our drawing craft, right? So things like anatomy, perspective, rendering, and I touched on this, but it's often what we're really focused on. It's often where we get stuck in that tutorial hell, right? Like worrying about how do I get better at drawing cubes or rendering boxes, or I need to draw 1,000,000 Loomis heads, right? I think the real trick and the problem, the thing that trips most students up that I've seen, most aspiring artists, is that yes, you need to learn how to create a Loomis head construction or to construct heads properly. It's really good to understand anatomy and the different proportions and, you know, how the face is separated out, and you learn all that stuff, but we all apply it differently. Some people are going to have a really realistic style where they're going to need to know how to express all of that detail. Other people are going to have a simple style where the proportions may be really important, but the way you express the form is a lot more subtle, it's iconic, it's symbolic. And other people, you may want to really play with those proportions and say, well, those are their proportions, but my eyes are a lot bigger, my mouth is a lot smaller, or whatever, right? It's a matter of consistency. So you need to learn the craft. You need to be able to match proportion from drawing to drawing. You need to understand what you're doing. But the way we actually apply it is very different. So the way that you will apply anatomy versus someone next to you versus me versus someone else is completely different. We all understand the basics, but the thing we have to learn is applying it. And the best way to do this, I found, is through just including a really solid construction phase in your drawing where you can experiment. You can measure, you can plan, you can draw through, you can draw your center lines, you can construct your form, you can find your ground plane, your horizon line, you can think about where your light source is coming from, you can maybe construct some of the initial plans for where the shadows are going to go. And you're just in a space where none of the lines you're making are going to make it a difference in the end, right? You're just kind of sketching and playing around and just building that kind of solid phase of your process. So again, that's just one example of how we can think about expanding the reliability of the process. But what we're not going to do, and what I'd recommend you don't do, is focus too much on fancy techniques, fancy layer techniques, trying to find different programs or better programs or more brushes or fancy techniques. Like, don't go complex. Make it as simple as you can, but think about how to create a process that allows you to make a really, really solid illustration. So that's kind of, I guess, the basic idea behind finding your simple, reliable process. And until you do that, don't worry about whether you're improving, because it's really hard to track that if you're just putting those things together. So once you get to the point in what I like to call stage 3, where you can just kind of make your art and do your thing, put one foot in front of the other, and then you're seeing like, I'm actually improving. That's when you know you're on the right path, right? You can kind of relax a little bit, and then you can start thinking about what your style is, what your artistic signal is, how to amplify it, all these kind of other concepts that I think are really, really important when it comes to actually making art that has personality and all that kind of stuff. But before that, again, I recommend you just build those 3 layers of foundation. The foundation of doing, of turning up. Secondly, the foundation of having a simple, reliable process using the least amount of tools, techniques, layers, fancy stuff, but having a really solid way of making an image that allows you to improve as you go. Until you build those, again, don't worry too much about the rest. Anyway, that's all I got for today in this video. Let me know whether that helped out. Sorry, that's just like a talking head theory style video, but I think this is one of these things that really can help unlock a lot of improvement. And most importantly, this is what I really believe to be true, is that you can get really good at art just by making fun art. You do not have to be stuck in tutorial hell. You do not have to be rendering boxes and 1,000,000 Loomis heads and kind of studying medical grade anatomy to draw cool, fun stuff from your imagination. Really, this is a matter of building a process for you to make art and understanding that you will get better by doing it. Art is a physical, somatic learning modality, right? It happens through us just doing it. It's like riding a bike, right? If you want a simple, it's like riding a bike. You learn it through physically doing it. You can't explain to someone how to ride a bike. You there's not much point watching tutorials on how to ride a bike. You kind of got to do it. And once you do it, you kind of remember how to do it, right? It's like riding a bike. Art is like one of those skills. It's a physical skill. You need to practice it. And I think you can get better at it, just mostly by doing it. So anyway, let me know whether that helped. If you want an example of me stepping through a simple, reliable process, check out this tutorial, because it's just where I talk about color theory, but I'm really only using a couple of brushes, a couple of simple ideas, but yet we're able to complete something that's fairly complicated. So if you haven't already, check that one out.